Our scripture verse for today is from Romans chapter 8, verse 28, which reads, "We know that in all things God works for good with those who love him, those whom he has called according to his purpose." There are many scripture verses that get misused and oftentimes wrenched out of context. When someone is going through a rather difficult time, often we will hear this verse, or at least the first part of it, which says, "We know that in all things God works for good." And we think that that becomes a comforting idea. But the scripture verse is not about God working all things for good for all people in all circumstances. It's not what Paul's intention here is. Paul wants to speak to those who are believers, those who belong to God's kingdom, those who are called by him into his purpose. What it says here is that God works all things for good for those who love him. What it wants to tell us is that God's plan, God's ultimate plan, is not derailed. And in the midst of whatever happens in our lives, that God's ultimate plan for his people is not put off track. And that can be a comforting thought. But its idea is not to be comforting, but it is to make us able to trust in what God has done and what God will continue to do. It warns us of the danger of just using a piece of Scripture. Pieces of Scripture may be helpful. Pieces of Scripture sometimes may seem encouraging and may seem wise. But it is the whole of Scripture that God has given us that we may know and trust it.